What is the ego? I think what trips a lot of people up about the term ego, or the egoic life, is the way we use the word here in the West. The word ego is often used in place when we mean conceited, arrogant, or narcissistic. However, what ego really is your socially created identity. Everyone deals with it at some point in their life. For some, the ego pretty much takes over their life. It becomes the story about you that is told to you by others or by yourself, and sometimes a combination of the two. This story about you, which I alluded to in my last video, is culminated into a single concept known as your life. For those who are farther down the path, you know this idea of my life is a misnomer or incorrect. This is because you are life. Life isn't a physical possession that can be taken from you. However, for most of us, we buy into this story of our life in our early years because we can see things and touch things, measure them, and get social feedback. Most of this comes from our family and also with the friends that we keep. So as an example, I remember when I was young, my mother used to tell me that I was like my great-grandfather, who passed away long before I was born. It wasn't until years later that I learned she had never met him either, and it was just a determination made by my family when I was very young. Almost like karma, destiny, or fate. I guess I could have gone my entire life acting out the preconceived notions that my family had for me. This is a very good example of what ego can do. It doesn't matter whether the concept of such a narrative is socially good or socially bad. What's much more important is that the narrative isn't authentic to the person being told the story. In that case, me. I was never really good at following rules anyways, so this particular narrative didn't trip me up for very long. However, such a thing happens to a great many people. They get trapped in the expectations of the story being told to them. Other times, we create our identity through our own experiences. Something good or bad happens to us, and we either like the experience or not. Whether it is an identity told to us or an identity we build up for ourselves, it forms a lens or a veil through which we view the world. So what's wrong with ego, some people ask? As long as I treat other people with kindness, what's wrong with living an egoic life? Well, nothing really, except for you're pretty much shortchanging yourself. You never really learn about who you are. You don't usually live out your time here in the way that you would want, and you definitely don't learn much about the wider universe. This is where I have to start talking about energy. You might have come across someone talking about vibrations or raising their vibrations. What they are talking about is the energy that flows through all of us. Our own life force, you, me, your grandma, everybody, draws in lower vibrations from the environment around us through the root chakra, and it cycles all the way through us. For some, the empaths who might be listening, they draw in energy very easily, and for others, those who have a closed root chakra, they don't draw in much energy at all. For the empaths, most things feel like way, way too much. They feel everything. And for those with a closed root chakra, their existence doesn't feel like anything at all. They can't identify with themselves. It just feels like they're a husk in their day-to-day existence. Finally, if you are processing energy in a balanced way, it flows through you and back outward through the crown chakra. You can relate to the outside world in ways that you want, gain the experiences in your day-to-day that you would like to experience rather than what you were taught was available to you. Now, looking at this chart leads us to a very obvious question. We know all about the first 7 chakras within our bodies, but what are the 2 chakras above the crown? They are not spoken of very often. The first, or really the 8th chakra, is what is called the soul star chakra. If this is open, then you can constantly transition into a state of awareness and awakening. You easily notice the energy of others and can discern how to interact with it. Now, discernment is a very important concept that we will come back to again and again. It becomes more crucial when dealing with different forms of energy. The 8th chakra is the last point of the confines of your life force, the physical existence on this planet, and those of others. Beyond this, we start really getting past duality and into the interconnectedness of the rest of the universe. The 8th chakra doesn't open until we deal with all the fears, doubts, and missives we have in daily life with the first 7 chakras. This is because we can't relate to the rest of the universe if we don't know how to relate to ourselves or those around us first. The 9th chakra is really the gateway to other energy forms. People with this chakra opened have clair abilities. They can connect to other people very easily in ways that don't make sense in our normal 3D world. But this is beyond the scope of this video. One of the things that is most important to know, no one chakra, the root or the soul star chakra, are any more important than the other. Chakras hold no status. There is no hierarchy of importance. Hierarchy is a lens that the ego loves to view the world through. So as an example, someone whose heart chakra is open isn't any more important, worthy, or blessed than someone who doesn't have their root chakra open. Now that we know this, let's start taking a look at energy through the chakra system and how shadow work is involved. All shadow work is revealing those parts of ourselves that we have repressed into our subconscious. However, even though we've repressed them, they still affect us and we are still playing out the emotions that are involved. We just don't fully recognize this. That's all shadow work is involved, is exposing that and bringing it back to the surface. Yet these aspects of us affect many people's lives. The real reason for this is due to what's called the law of attraction. Now, this is another concept we have to start talking about, because the law of attraction is one of the most misunderstood aspects of our reality. The law of attraction is usually viewed through a very egoic lens where we acquire something we desire. We need the new Lamborghini. We need the great job. We need to have one over on somebody else or have something that somebody else doesn't. What the law of attraction is really about is mirroring other energy around us or in the universe. Energy is mirrored according to the thoughts we produce and aligning all our energy centers to that thought. When something happens to us that becomes unresolved, the most normal way someone deals with an unresolved event is by putting it in a container in their mind and ignoring it. Every single person does it. The only difference is sometimes the energetic boxes we put them in are huge and other times they are pocket-sized. When we do this, our own energy records it either as a simple memory, an anchor point, a trigger, or a flashback. Triggers are very on trend these days, but don't get distracted by the modern lingo. All a trigger is an emotional flashback. That's it. The shadow self begins to grow when we put one of these fragments aside and begin to ignore it. This especially happens when that fragmented bit of energy isn't congruent with the social situations we're in. This may all sound like someone with multiple personality disorder, but we all do it. For instance, the social interactions you have at work are very different than the interactions you have with your partner. At least they better be. This is a sign of a healthy ego, because a healthy ego is really the conduit through which we reach these varying fragments, these varying parts of our own selves. It only goes wrong when we ignore the various circumstances and emotions we've been through. That's when ego takes over and convinces you that reality is only one specific way. Your time on this earth will only provide one specific option or a few specific options. What someone with a particular trigger needs to understand is the trigger itself is a symptom of an unresolved issue. It's your body or mind's way of saying, hey, I have this unresolved issue. I need you to pay attention to this. When a chakra is closed or out of alignment, the gateway into it is through a memory, an anchor point, a trigger, or a flashback. Accepting that these parts of you are just as valid as everything else is what shadow work is all about. As I've mentioned in a previous video, when shadow work is done, I've noticed chakras of course present themselves as opened or closed, but some of them can be unbalanced according to how a person processes things internally versus externally. So going through each chakra, we find the following. In the root, we have everything that forms our basic emotions, trust and security, our home and immediate environments. From these, we establish what we believe the world thinks of us and what we believe the wider world is like outside of us. The sacral chakra then takes the flow of energy from the root and processes it into how we feel. Particularly, This is where we hold and formulate our self-esteem, our sexual health, and our honesty. How these are processed determines how emotionally honest you are with yourself, whether you allow yourself to even process emotions at all, and then how emotionally honest you are with the wider world, how assertive or aggressive you are towards it. Once the sacral chakra is done with all this, it sends the energy out to the solar plexus, and this is where things begin to get really interesting, because you are going to act out your personal beliefs in the world for the first time. The solar plexus is where your will and the action to produce that will is put out in the world. Internally, you have personal goals and desires, and externally, we see whether you induce actions to create those goals in the physical world. This is where we can see differences in how people act in public or in private, and also where we see stuff like cognitive dissonance. Someone with a closed solar plexus isn't going to do much for themselves outside in the world. Those with a very unbalanced solar plexus to the right pillar will be extremely manipulative or overly aggressive, while those with an unbalanced chakra to the far left will be able to formulate their goals and desires but take no action to achieve them. Then we get to the heart chakra, where the energy passed is either accepted or rejected. The heart gets interesting because it's the center of our energy field and can send and receive energy to every other chakra. The common misconception is that the heart is about love. This is a very egoic lens once again. The heart is actually about acceptance of your actions and behaviors of those of others. So for people who have been through severe traumas in their past, once you deal with the primary affected chakras, you usually have to deal with the heart as well, because the final step is accepting your emotions and behaviors in the event and those of others. Without this step, without the acceptance, there usually isn't a balance of the other chakras in question. Then we get to the throat chakra, which deals with your inner and outer voice. The throat chakra is the beginning of thought form, where you identify your gut feelings. If the throat chakra is unbalanced to the left side, then we have a very introverted or shy person. And if it's unbalanced to the very far right, then we have very outgoing folks who express their feelings and thoughts to the world no matter what, sometimes without a filter. Again, there can be disconnect between the internal and the external sometimes. That depends on how the energy is flowing to this chakra. Then there is the third eye chakra. Before one can get to the mystical side of things, which all chakras have abilities beyond the physical world, the third eye helps us interpret the world we interact with. Shadow work helps us understand if someone is rejecting the things they're experiencing or taking it all in as it is without filtering it through their own egoic lens. Finally, within the body, we have the crown chakra. This deals with gnosis, which is Latin for knowledge. Are you able to process and understand all the emotional and physical energy taken in? If your crown chakra is unbalanced and far to the left, then those with issues of internal formation decide never to understand something. This is the proverbial head in the sand, and the third eye can be a bit like this too. Those people with shadow work needed on the external side refuse to use the knowledge they've processed. This often happens in conjunction with the throat. Now, it's worth mentioning at this point the soul star. In this case, for most people, shadow work becomes much more straightforward. In my experience, the way shadow work presents itself is as a rejection of things beyond duality. It comes in the form of fear of growing beyond the confines of duality or physical existence, or doubt of existence beyond oneself. Now, for those of you who are interested in the more esoteric side of things, the reason I use the tree of life with the chakra system is because it helps reflect what we see in the physical world. As I was describing the shadow work through the chakras, I identified the left side as internal processes and the right as external processes or actions. Some people get very carried away in their daily lives, and this is what causes an imbalance to the left or to the right. So, for instance, if you spend all your time on the internal side of things, it's not necessarily that you will lead a life of solitude, but what happens, for instance, in spiritualism is you end up valuing spiritualism to such an extreme degree and nothing else. So therefore you end up neglecting to manage your daily life. So a good example is the current trend of people going on ayahuasca retreats. Some people go to the extreme that they only have a spiritual experience through hallucinogenic drugs. On the far right side of the chart, we have people who only value materialism. Think Joel Osteen and his prosperity gospel, or even more extreme, someone who doesn't think anything exists outside of the material world. So this would be, for instance, somebody who follows science as the only way of living a life. The trick is to find a balance between the two that reflects your authentic self, allows you to achieve the flows of energy you would like, as well as function in the physical world we are in. In the next video, I'm going to talk a bit more about the law of attraction and how people use it every day, whether they know it or not. If you want to reach out, either drop a comment below or contact me on Reddit at Taoist360, and you can always find more resources on energypathworking.com. Until next time.